Hi, everyone. Welcome to another exciting edition of Words, Images, and Worlds. Delighted to be talking with comics creator Gregory Wright for a second time. Hi, Gregory.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Thanks for joining. Thanks for talking with me.
It was fun the last time, so of course I came back.
We try. We try. You are also a fellow educator, as we were just talking about. Our students think we're like 109 years old or something.
Yes, at least.
Yes, yes. It totally works though, and folks out there will know you for work on a range of titles, particularly for Marvel, but also in the world of one Mr. Clive Barker, who scares me. But there's also Daredevil, Deathlok, Ghost Rider, Silver Sable, just a range of characters, as well as Punisher, Predator, Alien. We could go on. We could go
Oh
on.
yeah, it's funny when people say, "Well, what did you work on?" It's like, well, at Marvel, pretty much everything.
Hmm
At
hmm
DC, because I did, like 0 Hour and Marvel versus DC, I've pretty much worked on everything at DC. I've done a lot for Dark Horse. I've done various projects for Image and various indie projects here and there. It's been nice to have such an interesting variety of stuff to work with and a lot of different people. Although it's funny, some of the people I've worked with at all of the companies
hmm
because they as they moved around and they wanted me to work with them, they kind of brought me along, which was nice.
That's always a compliment. Always a
It is. It
compliment.
really,
Yeah.
when creators request or even demand that's when you've really done something because I mean, it's their work. So if they
hmm
want, to work with you, um, it is. It feels fantastic, rather than, them going, oh, well, I guess I'll put up with that guy.
Right. Right. True enough. And we talked last time about sort of a 3,000 foot view of your creating, your creative history, your work with BG, Chichester, and a few topics like that. But I thought we would talk this time about some of the darker corners of your creating. That's right. Excellent. Excellent. I'm seeing that face over your shoulder there and just thinking about some of those darker corners. What's that been like to get to explore some of that in comics?
Well, it's a lot of fun, I've always been a horror fan. I love the old EC comics horror things, and when I was a kid, that's when the really gory horror films were first coming up.
Hmm
The Friday the 13th and the Dawn of the Deads, and most of them they weren't really very scary, but they provided you with lots of those things that jumped out at you, and the audience would all scream at once and jump back, and that was that it was a thrill. But being able, it's like, it's the same sort of thing as when you actually tell a funny joke and people laugh. It makes you
hmm
feel good. It's the same thing when you're working in the darker areas of horror and stuff, and when you actually creep people out or you actually can scare them, especially in a comic. It's really a little harder because you don't have things that really jump off them. It's just pages that can close it. So it's a lot of fun, and it's always fun to explore the darker parts of your imagination, because we all have them, and there's
hmm
always things that we will never talk about publicly because that would get us, into trouble. But you think about terrible things, and when you get to write some of that stuff, you can say, well, these horrifying things I've been thinking about, I can have the bad guy do them, and it's
hmm
okay because they're the bad guy, so I can sort of enjoy thinking up terrible things. Um, so yeah, it's fun. It also, it's like a roller coaster. It's safe to write terrible things,
hmm
where it's not safe to actually do terrible things. Not that I
Right.
want to, but it's kind of like that roller coaster safety. It's like I wouldn't jump off the Empire State Building, but if there was a drop ride that dropped like that, maybe I'd ride that.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's the like basic cathartic thrill, and
Yeah,
something that you respond to. It's kind of a reflex.
yeah.
Yeah. Now you've gotten to work in sort of in the world of Clive Barker. You've also worked with characters like Deathlok. I imagine those are some really interesting muses to sort of explore and bounce off.
Well, it's Barker's a whole different sort of ball game. The thing is,
Yeah.
he's one of the nicest, sweetest people you would ever meet. And a lot of his horror, he regards it as very beautiful.
Hmm.
So it's some crazy psychosexual stuff, but he sees it more innocently and stuff, and which made it a little weird when you go to write some of his material because him,
Hmm.
and he's a nice guy like Stephen King. He's an incredibly nice man.
Yeah.
And yet he's written some stuff that'll just curdle your blood.
Right.
Um,
Right.
but it's like with characters like Deathlok, the nice thing about it was Dwayne McDuffie and I created a character specifically to be a character that would grow.
Hmm.
He starts off as kind of this innocent, naive pacifist, who honestly believed everything he was doing was for the good, and then we sort of set up about breaking him. Um, and the idea was for him to grow and see, well, where does this character go? Because you really don't get that a lot with a lot of characters.
Hmm.
This is who they are, and they're not going to suddenly change so much. But we, wanted this character to grow. We want, and he was going, and he does break here and there as we go, and he has to sort of come back, and it's difficult, but it made it for a lot more interesting stories to write and a lot more, actual character from the beginning because, we're starting with, Rich Buckler and Doug Mensch's character, Deathlok.
Hmm. Hmm.
And, we kept the name. It's basically the same idea. There's a guy, who's a cyborg and there's a computer on board and he wasn't in control initially and then he takes control. So it's like, well, how do you make that different? You have to, the guy that's controlling the suit has to be very, very different.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
so it was very interesting to sort of plumb those moral depths, and I purposely threw the worst stuff I could at him, and it was very difficult to not have him break more often, because there was dark stuff. His kid got involved with a drug dealer, and his life was in jeopardy, and he had to actually team up with the Punisher just to
Hmm.
save his kid's life. And you find out, and it's just like, well, that's dark. He, Nightmare pulled him in and stuff, and he had to fight with the cyber warriors, and every time you turn around, everybody's trying to kill him and kill his family. And he wasn't built for that.
Yeah. Literally. Literally.
So yeah, literally. So that made it was always stuff that you could do that was interesting. Um, so yeah, that was fun.
Yeah, and to have a character like that sort of existing, but same with Punisher in a world with like Steve Rogers and Tony Stark and Peter Parker
Right.
and some of these other characters, it kind of pulls the story, pulls that universe in some really interesting directions too.
Well, that's what I always liked and I always thought, the characters really need to be much more clearly defined and being very different.
Hmm.
Because sometimes we'd have artists that came in, um, and they didn't really understand the difference between the heroes and how they might fight and how they might move. And they just thought, well, they're all super strong and they can all just beat the crap out of everybody.
Hmm.
And that's just not it. I mean, there was an issue of Daredevil that my friend DG wrote, and the artist drew this super pumped up Daredevil who just ripped the car door off with one hand. And we had to say, dude, first off, Daredevil's way too big.
Hmm.
Uh, and number two, he can't rip a car door off with his hands. And even if he could, he would not.
Yeah.
And he did not understand that because he just didn't, he wasn't told. There was this sort of assumption that everybody understands all this stuff. They don't. Peter Parker as Spider-Man is very different than Miles Morales. You
Hmm.
know,
Hmm.
in very good ways. Steve Rogers is the ultimate, good guy. But his integrity has caused him to actually leave being Captain America on a couple occasions.
Hmm. Hmm.
The Silver Surfer is an alien. He doesn't have the same morals that we have. And you have to kind of try, it's interesting to try to write these characters that are not just ciphers and they're not just superficial.
Yeah.
But that's kind of the fun of writing these characters, even though they're not my characters. Either somebody else either created them or I created them for Marvel. But you want to try to, excuse me,
Mhm.
as long as you're doing them, you want to try to do them justice and to do something that's intriguing and interesting. And just because I think it's interesting, sometimes the readers just don't care. they frequently miss the stuff. They just wanted to see the pretty pictures, and that's
Right.
the thing that is always upsetting about being a writer is you put all this work in, and then all they notice is the really cool artwork that Lee Weeks drew. Not that he doesn't deserve it, but
Yeah.
but you kind of wish they'd notice.
Yeah. Yeah. There has to be some supporting structure, a lot of supporting structure under that art to tell that story sequentially. So absolutely. Yeah.
Well, sometimes, you write a story that's not so great and the artist actually takes it to another level. And then once you dialogue it, it's something completely new. So it's not always, well, the writer's always driving it. Sometimes it's, people have written lousy little stories. I mean, I remember getting a couple plots that were kind of, almost like the old Stan Lee plots where, he just says, okay, the Fantastic Four is going to fight Doctor Doom and he's going to kidnap Sue. And that was all he gave the artist. And then the artist, really creates the story.
Mm-hmm.
And then the writer comes in and does more than just put words in their mouths. The writer then takes that story to the next level. So you're still part of the story, but the artist sometimes is the one that made that story into a real story with their art. I mean, Kirby certainly did that. Alan Davis took a story that Dwayne and I wrote that wasn't all that good, but after he drew it, we were like, wow, this looks like a really good story now, but it really wasn't. But you were fooled by that beautiful Alan Davis art.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the collaboration is certainly part of comics, as with film, I guess, in that way. And you're a person who's worked in coloring. You've done kind of the writing side, editing as well. And so curious about how all of those different hats kind of inform your work.
Well, when I write in color.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of my early writing and stuff, I always insisted on doing the color because to me, the color is an integral part of telling the story, not just making it look cool. So, when I am just coloring stuff, like right now, I just color. I want to read the story and the plot because I'm going to choose colors, not just based on the art the artist has done. I'm going to be choosing my colors based on what is going on in the story. Because inking is becoming less noticeable, I guess, because so many pencilers are penciling so tight, and we don't have a lot. We only have a few of those guys like Klaus Janson and Bill Sienkiewicz left who are doing. You could tell, hey, they inked this and they put their stamp on it, and it looks fantastic. Most of the inkers are winding up having to kind of, duplicate the pencils with a very beautiful controlled line. So the color winds up because of the digital process. Now there's in some cases they're taking the art and turning it into like a painting. It doesn't look like a comic to me, and that bothers me. I want things to look like comics.
Yeah.
Not that the painting stuff doesn't look great, it does, but that used to be reserved for like a graphic novel or a special limited series, and now any stupid comic winds up looking like that, which is kind of silly. So yeah, so they've always both informed both. And because I was an editor, I have a very difficult time not sort of editing everybody else on the team in my head. So when I get something, I'm immediately thinking, well, the writer should have done this, that, the other thing, and oh, why didn't the artist do that? And what can I do with the color to put this more in the direction that I want it? You can't really turn your editor head off. But it also, it would harm me when I would write because I would be thinking, well, I don't want the editor to have to deal with this. So I would purposely maybe not do a couple things that might have been a better thing to do. I sort of self-edited. And I do the same thing sometimes when I'm coloring. I get a little bit concerned. Well, the office might not like this. When when I was coloring a lot at Marvel, I really couldn't care less what any editors thought. I only cared what the readers thought and what the artist thought, and I could defend everything I did. So I was incredibly cocky. But then as the work started to lessen and I wasn't super in demand, I started paying more attention, and then I kind of noticed that my color wasn't as good, because my color is always the best when I decide I'm just going to do I'm going to really go for it, and that's always been when the creators liked it the most.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
yeah, they all inform each other.
it's all organic.
It is very organic.
Yeah. Any particular kind of story? We've talked a lot about the characters that you've worked on. Uh, any particular genres or types of work that you'd like to do in comics and like to explore that you haven't had the chance to? Because you have a great range of creating.
I haven't gotten to do a lot of, what I would call like comedy.
Hmm.
I kind of like, I would love to do, like an actual, I mean, I've done a couple little funny things, but, I would love to do one that's kind of like a situation comedy, comic, but there's no way that you have to have an artist that can do that. I've been rewatching Friends as an example, and the writing is really interesting and fun, but the actors really pull this stuff off. So
Hmm.
an artist has got to pull off the expressions, and they have to pull off the body language and stuff. It's like I got to work with Hilary Barta on a story once in which it was Stanley was writing a screenplay, and the Impossible Man showed up, and he did all this crazy fun stuff that made whatever I did seem way funnier.
Yeah.
But I could do that all the time. It's a lot of fun, as long as you actually are funny. But
Right.
we all think we're a lot funnier than we are, and sometimes we start making jokes that are not what I would call universally funny. Uh,
Hmm.
they're like cruel, intended to hurt somebody funny, and we think they're funny, but they're really, they're really not, universally funny. And now it's hard to write a joke because everybody's offended by everything.
Yeah.
Uh, so you kind of got to be careful. But yeah, that would be something that would be really a lot of fun to do that. I don't know how long you could sustain it for.
Hmm.
I've always admired the guys that do, the strips, in newspapers, because they've got to write a joke every day, and
Yeah.
they've got 3, 4 panels to write that joke. And a lot of the comics, they're not that funny, they're not that good, and they cheat, and they, instead of doing a joke, they tell like a story that takes place over several weeks. But if you go back and you read, Calvin and Hobbes, or um, what was Berkeley Breathitt's Bloom County, uh,
Hmm. Hmm.
or Peanuts, the sort of the king of those strips. It's astonishing that they were able to literally write a good joke
Yeah.
every day, and some of them were fantastic. I mean, you could still go back and read that stuff, and it's not dated, and they really pull it off. And Bill Watterson, specifically on Calvin and Hobbes, the artwork, again, it tells his jokes so well. You almost don't need the words,
Hmm.
because he's written it visually with the expressions on everybody's faces and the way that they move. So yeah, that would be a real challenge. It's like, action is easy for, I can think up action scenes really quickly. That's just not even hard for me, and coming up with something terrible and scary, that's not so hard. But the comedy is hard.
Yeah.
And Dwayne used to, I used to laugh, and he'd say, "Okay, write me a joke." And I was like, "What?" He goes, "Just go ahead, write me a joke. I mean, we'll see if it's funny." And I tried to write him a joke, and it was hard. I was like,
Ah.
"Ah." He goes, "That's all I wanted you to understand was, comedy is harder."
Hmm. Hmm. And
Uh,
to pull that off visually too in a comic format.
right. Not everybody can do it. I mean, if you look at some of the, like the What Does and the sort of parody comics, they're nothing. It's like not everybody is somebody is like Jack Davis,
Uh-huh.
from Mad Magazine, they're or Don Martin. It's like they were always funny. Sergio Aragon's, always funny. But not everybody is always funny. They can draw funny animals, but they're not so funny.
True, true. Now, I would be remiss before we get to the final question if I didn't point out our mutual Star Wars love that we're evidencing here.
Oh yeah,
Unplanned. And you're always on my night table, of course. There's always a stack of books. There's one right now that I was reading just this past week. So much appreciation there as well.
that's awesome. Mark Grunwald used to tell me that when we used to get our stack of comics every week for whatever came out, Marvel and DC and Dark Horse, and he would pull Silver Sable out and read it first.
Oh,
And I
nice.
thought, wow, I don't know what a better compliment is that he wants to read that one first. Other than Tom DeFalco said I wrote a better Silver Sable than he did, and he's the one that created her.
Yeah.
And I was like,
Yeah.
wow, really? That was a big deal because they never stopped me from doing anything that I did in the book, and I did some things that maybe they should have stopped me here and there, but no, they trusted me on that, so that was a really good, very satisfying, when to hear that. So
Yeah.
I'm very happy to hear that you have one on your nightstand.
Oh, of course, absolutely. There's always a stack. I'm sitting around multiple comics here, so always a stack. And yeah, really, really interesting work with that character. And glad that you, as we've kind of touched on through the interview, you pull into the surface of characters and bring in something interesting that very often goes beyond the superficial.
Well, I did another podcast and we were talking about Hydra, of
Hmm.
all things. And it was with DG Chichester and I. And one of the things that, they're like, well, how did Silver Sable get into this? And I'm like, well, her her father was a Nazi hunter, you know. And they said, so it's just sort of a natural. I said, Nazis are the best bad guys because nobody is ever going, why are you picking on Nazis?
Right.
They are the universal, everyone, hates Nazis. Germans hate Nazis more than anybody. And you can't even have any Nazi stuff in Germany. It's completely illegal, which I thought was pretty interesting.
Hmm.
So yeah, it was kind of it, but it's sort of interesting how these things sort of develop. Nazis.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're Nazis in
That's
Star
definitely
Wars, really, but kind of.
yes,
You
kind of
know,
relabeled. Yeah.
Did you watch the Acolyte?
I've seen some bits, I've seen some pieces. I haven't watched it start to finish, but I'm always interested in checking out the
Yeah,
new
I watched it all.
directions. Yeah.
I don't always like all of it, but I find the pacing of a lot of the shows, you have to watch the whole thing and then maybe watch it again
Hmm.
because there's lots of great stuff in there that because the pace is a little slower than maybe I want, I might like have fallen asleep during or missed. But yeah, I just the whole mythos of Star Wars, and we were on an airplane coming home from Greece a couple of weeks back, and Star
I
Wars,
saw the
one of the
posts,
little
yes.
uh, movies that you could watch. I said, yeah, I'm going to watch the original. Well, it's not the original because they've messed with it, but and I watched it again. I'm like, wow, I never get tired of the original Star Wars movie, and it just
Yeah.
takes me back to being, a kid when I went to the movie theaters on opening day and had no idea what to expect, and then that giant ship comes over the top of you, and the theater is like vibrating from the noise.
Yeah.
It's like, wow,
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
am I in for? And I never would have thought that I would have been like Star Wars crazy for the rest of my life.
But here we are, and yeah, I love the payoffs in the series that they do. Both they take it in new places. They pay homage to the longtime
Yep.
fans, and I also remember what it was like to be in like a desert of the stuff where like, oh, it's been 10 years and we haven't really seen
Right. We had
anything in
nothing,
film. Yeah,
So we bought the comics and
indeed,
know,
and read the novels and
I read
all
the
the
novels
things.
again and again, and then when video came out, we could watch them again.
Yes,
Oh
yes.
my God. I actually had they used to sell like little short versions of movies on Super 8.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
I, saved my money and I had uh about 40-minute versions of Star Wars and The Empire Strikes Back and Indiana Jones that I could in sound and color that I could watch on my little projector.
Yeah.
And it's funny because I would get used to this short edited version. And then when you watch the real version, you're like, wait a minute, something's not right here.
Hmm.
It's
Hmm.
different. But yeah, I still have all my Star Wars toys from a kid. The original like little Luke Skywalker figures with the lightsaber that
Nice.
went up into their arm and stuff.
Uh-huh. I
I still
remember
have my original
those.
$6 million man figure too. So
Nice, nice. It's behind the background there somewhere.
no, no, it's not. It's my I can't show my office. My office is such a disaster. So this is actually it's a this is a Three Floyds is a brewery in Munster, Indiana,
Oh,
and
nice.
famous beers is called Zombie Dust, and it's a very very high IPA, uh, you know, high a very hoppy IPA, and it's really good. And I just spotted this truck in New York City once, and I thought are they bringing Three Floyds beer to New York? No, they weren't. You know, some stores have imported a couple of the beers that they produce, but nothing like going to the brewery.
Nice, nice. Love it.
If
Love
you're
it.
ever in Munster, you want to go.
Cool, cool. I'll also mention you're talking about Greece, and I tend to ask about the places where people can go to find out more about your work and things like that. Your posts about food are their own sort of really interesting, attractive online experience, I have to say.
Yeah, well, most Instagram is mostly where I put most of the food I make. Um,
Yes.
and then Facebook is where I hang out the most. That's the best place to find me. It's very easy. I'm in a lot of groups, and I'm always happy to answer questions to people. I've managed to get away from the toxic people who want to start a fight. I
Yes.
got tired of it because I would just end the fight for them. I'm like, okay, let me explain why you're completely wrong, uh,
Hmm.
and now you need to be quiet. And they usually have been quiet. So now it's really just interacting with a lot of fans and people who like yourself do shows.
Hmm.
And it's a lot of fun because people ask a lot of interesting questions, and sometimes a question gets asked, you're like, wow, I haven't thought about that in a lot of years, and you got to sort of think, why did I do that? Did I do that? Or it's like you forget, that you worked on something.
Oh, yeah.
It was a new universe group, and I interact on there, and it's fun because it was such torture doing those new universe books
Hmm.
because Jim Shooter just made it a living hell, and nobody wanted to work on him, so it was a lot of us new guys. Every month it was somebody different working on a lot of the books, except for DP7, which Mark Grunwald and Paul Ryan did the whole run. But they so appreciate those books in this group, and it's nice to say, oh, okay, we couldn't enjoy this back then,
Hmm.
but now, because we really were trying to do, good stuff, um,
Hmm.
and it just felt like it wasn't happening, but it was happening, and it kind of proves it with this group of people that really love the new universe stuff, and and you see like people like Fabian Nicieza, he came out of that group, and a whole lot of art. Mark Texiera came out of there as an artist. Javier Saltares, Ron Lim. A
Yeah.
lot of these guys. That's where they could get work. Mark Bagley. They got a lot of their early work doing the New Universe stuff and proving themselves until they moved on to the Marvel books, which actually made some money. Um, but yeah, it's kind of fun to find this different group of people than the toxic group that used to be on CompuServe. I don't know if you remember CompuServe when
I do. Yes, yes.
and people, it was just like, let's just take a giant shit on everything, and we'll fight with the creators. Like, you want to fight with me, you better find me in person.
Yeah.
uh I'm not having it online. In person, you want to come at me, good luck. um I will win. You will look stupid, but I'll do it to your face. I don't want to do it behind your back. So yeah, but yeah,
Right.
I ran away from CompuServe very quickly. I said, nope, this is not for me. Facebook was much more friendly and welcoming to me. I know there's still some toxicity out there, but
You get to
it's
curate your space pretty quickly too.
I do. Anybody that's, if you're being a jerk, you're gone. I don't need you on my feed.
Hmm. Hmm.
It's very simple, and it's I've got people who have very differing opinions of me on my feed, and that's okay. Up until there's a line, if you cross it, and on my page you will not fight with anybody.
Yeah.
It's like Larry Hama says, this is my living room.
Hmm.
If you're gonna disobey my rules, you're gone.
Yeah. Yeah. That's kind of the way you have to be because people can be very drastic and there's a beauty to social media, at least in terms of possibility. So
There
love that.
is,
Yeah.
there is.
Yeah. Well, anything that currently has your creative attention that you'd like to mention, or anything that you're currently reading, enjoying, exploring story-wise?
Ooh, okay. Well, I enjoyed my friend Dan Chichester's Black Armor Daredevil.
Yeah. It was epic. It was epic.
That was
Yes.
really good. I got to work a little bit with him on developing his story because he didn't. He was. It's been a while since he'd written something, so he wanted somebody other than just the Marvel editors, and he and I have a lot of the same taste. So it was a joy to watch him pull that together so well.
Mhm,
Um,
mhm.
so that was really good. I enjoyed that. Currently, I'm starting work on. Graham Nolan's latest Escape from Monster Island, which will
Nice.
be crowdfunding soon.
Love
Uh,
his stuff. Love it.
and then I'm working on something I'm not allowed to talk about
Exciting.
that I
Always
used to work
exciting.
on that's coming back. And I'm working with my good friend Ron Wagner, who's been working on this Western comic for I don't even want to tell you how long. And he had me want to color it at first, and then the people that were working with him wanted him to do it, so he tried to do it, and it was just very hard. So now he and I are kind of working together with on the color. So I'm doing part of it, passing it on to him to finish. So so far the results of that are really cool looking. And I've been dying to work with Ron again, since we worked on Morbius together. Um,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it's this is definitely when you look at when this kind of stuff, it's um, you could tell somebody really loved drawing it,
Hmm.
and that's one of the things that is really awesome in comics is you can tell when somebody really enjoyed drawing it, but you can also tell when somebody really didn't care.
Hmm.
I've
Hmm.
colored thousands and thousands of comics, and so many of them. I remember looking, I'm thinking, wow, the penciler really did not care at all about
Yeah.
any of this. And some of it I understand. It's like, okay, this is a terrible story, and then they say, can you make it look like Jim Lee? No, I can't color it to look like Jim Lee. It doesn't start out like that. It's like you have to actually put lighting and black and stuff in. And this is back before, now, well, sure, I can paint on top of it and make it look like Jim Lee. I would never do that. Uh,
Hmm.
and I actually can't make it look like Jim Lee, but I could put all that extra stuff on.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
but back when they were asking that, that's before we had all these tools. We had the terrible color separators that couldn't do any of the stuff properly. So and you only had 64 colors. And it's like, no. If the art's not like 100% perfect from the get-go, I can't make it look a lot better. I
Yeah.
don't have the colors to do that. It needs something called black.
Hmm. Hmm.
Because if you remember certain comics, they just were outlines. And as color got better, people, the colors were putting in all this rendering, and when you look at it now, it looks terrible because they didn't have the technology wasn't there to do it right.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but then you look at what Barry Windsor Smith was able to do with color, and it's baffling. But he also wasn't coloring crap; he was coloring his stuff,
Right.
which
Right.
looked great in black and white. So the things he did in color worked because it was already there. And I have to think when he was drawing it, he must have been thinking in color
Hmm.
because it
You
is.
would have
I
to.
remember just looking at his stuff and I'm like, I don't understand how this and the color separators would do a pretty good job on his stuff. And it was so complicated. There was so many colors everywhere. But he did understand what to do. But he had good artwork to start with since it was his.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Creative control and vision.
Yeah, I'm trying to think if there's anything I read so much. Mostly what I'm reading is nonfiction. I'm actually reading an interesting book called I think it's called Uncomfortable Conversations with a Jew.
Ah,
And
yeah.
it's written by this black author who has written several of these uncomfortable conversation books.
Hmm.
And he wrote it with this woman who's a Jewish like kind of historian commentator. And it's asking all those questions that you're afraid to ask.
Hmm.
And she's answering them very bluntly. And the point of the book isn't to change your mind about anything or to convince you or to have you believe. It's to promote an understanding of why certain people may behave a certain way or think a certain way. And it's fascinating to read because, again, they're asking questions that you've always wanted to ask certain questions of certain types of people, but you're afraid if I ask that question, am I being hateful by asking the
Hmm.
question?
Hmm.
And that was the ground rules. They could ask any question and not take offense.
Nice.
So
And
it's very intriguing to read. So it makes me want to read another one uh, because he had another one, uncomfortable conversations with a black man. Um,
mhm.
but you're black and he's black. I'm not sure how it gets that uncomfortable. Um, but this one is actually it's very interesting and a lot of historical stuff. And it does what I like in a book. It makes me think and it
Mhm.
makes me wonder. And that's for me, I always hope, when when I write something that somebody might think or wonder about it. And I don't know if that's ever really happened or if they just sort of enjoyed it or hated it or what, because we never really got enough mail to, today it's like, like you get a lot of feedback.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. In comment sections on social media. Yeah.
yeah, there's a lot of it. So yeah.
Yeah. Love the nonfiction as well, and the ability to learn something at the same time as enjoying something. I think Malcolm Gladwell has a new book coming out, or that's just come out. I'll have to check. I'm always interested to kind of read about different perspectives.
Yeah. Oh, and my friend Chad just got he got fully funded on his comic version of his book Gay Mormon Dad. Um, and the his book was fascinating. When I got it, it's like so when I met him and he said, "Oh, I wrote this book," so I immediately went and got the book and read it. He goes, "What, you read it?" I went, "Yeah," and I said
Nice.
it was amazing to read. This account again, it's a very different world. It's like than I've ever encountered. But he got funded on the comics, so I'm excited for the comic version of that to come out.
I'm gonna mark that down so I can go
Yeah, you
check
should
it
look it
out.
up. That's really good. That and I've been reading Noah Van Scriver's. It's
Know
about
the
the
one.
founder. It's like the history of the founder, and it's very long, but it's really good. It's really fascinating. I really do. I really like Noah's work quite a bit.
He's awesome and a kind person to meet too. Joseph Smith and the Mormons graphic
Yes, that was it.
biography. Yep.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
that's been a really, it's funny. I think some of the goofy stuff I decided to read. Um, and then, I've been reading everything that Colleen Duran's been adapting, with
Absolutely.
so I'm very much looking forward to the Good Omens book that she's working on.
Yeah, Colleen Duran is amazing. Snow Glass and Apples.
Oh, that
Love
was,
it.
seeing the original pages of some of that, the printing, even though the printing got better as they kept going back to press, and she was very, good about getting in there and trying to get it printed properly. But the pages are insane, and she did some pages. She knew that she was going to sell pages,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
she did work on the pages she knew would never actually be showing up in print, but she knew that somebody that bought the page would get to enjoy the gold leaf or whatever stuff. It's just crazy. Her work. They had a show of hers at the Society of Illustrators last year,
Mhm.
and getting to see most of it was from Chivalry. Um, then and just seeing the pages live, because we don't get to see real art anymore. We everything is
Yeah.
digital.
Hmm.
When I was in the office, every day was like Christmas because these FedEx packages came and you opened them up and oh look, here's John Romita Jr. Pencils inked
Yeah.
by Al Williamson that I can look at as long as I want. Or painted pages by Jay Muth or any of
Hmm.
it. It was just because I had Tom Palmer and Joe Sinnott working for me, and this is my normal day seeing John Buscema inked by Tom Palmer pages every day.
It's
I
not a
mean,
bad day at all.
no, it's and after work, myself and a couple other editors, we would just go look at all the art in everybody's drawers.
Yeah.
So getting to really look at the stuff, and seeing, like the pencil version that nobody sees
Hmm.
because when they used to ink everything right on top of the boards, letter everything on the boards. So you might find a Xerox of the pencils at some point, but you'll never see those pencils again. Now you do. Now people pencil it and then they scan it into the computer and they print it out on this blue paper, like blue lines, and then they ink that. So now it's just very strange to me. The collector's market doesn't quite. What's the value now? Because it used to be this page was touched by these two creators. Now this page was not touched by both. It's the penciler's work, but
Hmm.
the only person that touched it is the inker now.
Yeah.
I mean, this is the page that gets printed, but some of it is they actually are digitally inking it. So there are some comics that there is no actual original art to hold.
Hmm. Hmm.
And
Yeah.
that's
It's a
when
new
I color,
age.
it's all digital now. I mean, I miss having my guides to look at and hold in my hand. So it's kind of frustrating to not. It feels like you're not actually creating anything. Um,
Yeah.
the output is better because we're in control of it, but
Hmm.
it's not. I guess I could, do. guides for myself, but yeah, it's not the same. But I just cannot comprehend people who don't pencil and ink on the boards at all anymore.
Yeah.
Um, it's just why? How could you? And a lot of it, it's a lot faster, I guess they say, and you can't really tell the difference in a lot of cases.
Hmm. Hmm.
Wolf Portacio was the first person I saw doing digital art, and his line work is very fine and it's very refined, and you could not tell that he did it digitally. And I thought, said, okay, this is it. This is definitely the future. If Wils's stuff can be done like this, anybody. But
Yeah.
yeah, still, man, I miss touching the pages. So, but yeah,
There,
if you
there,
get a chance to
there's
go to shows to see actual original arts, go do that.
absolutely, absolutely. I was just gonna say there are some of those books that do like it looks like 3D modeled rendering. It kind of looks like a video game that's trying to be a comic,
Yeah,
or vice versa.
I don't quite, I don't know. I like comics that look like comics. They don't
Yeah.
have to look like, old comics or anything. I mean, and I certainly don't mind, the rendering and all that kind of stuff on it. It's just when they stop looking like a comic book, it's like when the Archie comics stop looking like Archie comics at all. It's like I don't want to read that. I want an Archie comic, and I do want it to be those flat colors and
Hmm. Hmm.
stuff. I don't need it to look this other way. That's just not for me. But
Yeah.
I'm not buying comics, so what does it matter what I think?
Well, it informs your work. It informs the approach that you take. So that's where the payoff is, I suppose.
Sometimes, why I try to do my work that'll work for today.
Yeah.
So I'm putting more effort in than I think should be put in some cases.
Well, Gregory, I promised you a brief talk. It's always great to talk with you. Um, you mentioned going and seeing art. Any convention spaces that you frequent?
I'm always at New York Comic Con. I'm not a guest there. I just kind of I go as a pro once you get through the system of do you deserve to be here that they
Hmm.
make you go through, and then they make you pay for it. Not as much as they make the fans pay, but I go there every year mostly so that I can see old friends that I've worked with for a long time, and they don't usually have as long a line at their table as other people. So I usually get a really nice conversation with people like Rick Leonardi and
Hmm.
Ron
Hmm.
Garney and Lee Weeks. And I get to see some of my friends that were from editorial that were there. So and it's nice to see all the art. I'll probably be at FlameCon again this year. I went last year because my friend Chad did they did this weird sort of fashion show panel of X-Men costumes that was probably the funniest panel I've ever seen in my life. So FlameCon was absolutely wonderful. I highly recommend if you're in the New York area in August. It's the nicest group of people, and I met a lot of artists doing art that is so good that that they're not doing it professionally. They're just kind of doing it. I'm like, why are you not doing this professionally? I
Hmm.
mean, you'll have to cover up all the penises and stuff to do it in regular comics, but beautiful stuff.
Hmm. Yeah.
So that would be good. I'm probably going to. It's not not no. It's one near Hershey in November, I think. Um,
Nice.
but I'm usually wandering around. If I'm ever actually have a table, I'll announce, hey, I'm here at my table. Come over and I'll abuse you.
I just had the chance to meet Rick Leonardi at Heroes Con a couple of months
Oh,
back.
that's one of my favorite cons. I haven't been there
Yeah.
in years. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, Rick's a great guy. I love Rick's art. Rick's a great guy. And Heroes, it's such a good convention. That's where I met all the guys from the Gaijin studios at the time. Tony Harris and Collie Hammer and
Oh
all the
yeah, yeah.
incredibly talented crew. But I haven't been back. I haven't been back there in years. So I have to call Shelton and say, hey, invite me down.
Yeah, yeah. Maybe I will get to see you there. That would be great.
Because aren't you're around there, aren't you? Are you in North Carolina?
Yes. Yeah, we live just a few hours away from there, so it's a frequent stop. It's a pretty easy stop, and I also have a couple of friends that go there, so it's kind of a reunion spot for us as
Yeah.
teachers who enjoy comics.
Yeah, well, it's funny. A lot of teachers do. I've had some of our teachers try to use comics as a way to get the kids to read
Hmm.
because they don't want to read. All they want to do is play on their cell phones. Like,
Yeah.
let them read a comic. And they said, it's still reading, although, I wish we still had, classic comics. Whatever happened to those?
I ran across a bunch at a comic shop just a little while ago, but the only thing that I'm seeing published right now actively, of course, Gareth Hines occasionally does a beautiful painted like Homer adaptation. His
Yeah.
work is really something. But there's some manga ones that a
No,
friend of
really?
mine has tried out. Yeah, those seem to be popular and they get some traction. Um, but yeah, there's definitely a market for that to come back or be reissued or something.
Yeah. I mean, as a kid, I remember, I read a lot of those, classic comics, and it made me want to read those books. I
Hmm.
mean, that's, I saw the Disney 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. I read the classic comic. I well, this is different. And then I went and read the book.
Yeah.
Uh, it's sort of like music. You hear this classical music in Bugs Bunny, and you go, "What's that?" And then you go find out what it is, and then you hear the actual real classical music, and then you're a classic music fan because of Bugs
Hmm.
Bunny.
Hmm. The moment you read an adaptation of Les Mis and go, that wasn't so bad, and then you see the original and you're like, oh, yes, yes, absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. I was one of those kids that I read some of those big books without being forced. I read
Yes.
Ivanhoe, Moby Dick, and
Hmm. Hmm.
like, why are you reading them? I was like, because I wanted to. And Ivanhoe was a mistake. It's so long.
Yeah, yeah. I was also a Moby Dick reader. Check that out. I think just to say that I did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's like reading, like Naked Lunch and, it's various classics of literature that I'm not sure, maybe that's not really a classic. Um, well, you have to read this. Okay.
Hmm. Hmm.
But I read most of them, but yeah, now it's all nonfiction. It's, I mean, I actually just finished another book I loved. It was, uh, uh, Steven Soderbergh's book. Um, no, he directed the Addams Family movies.
Sonnenfeld. Barry
Yeah, Barry
Sonnenfeld.
Sonnenfeld.
Yeah,
He
yeah.
wrote a book called Barry Sonnenfeld, Your Mother is Calling, and his crazy history of coming up in the industry and as a child, and the famous thing is he was at Madison Square Garden for a
Mm,
concert, and they
mm.
announced over the PA system, Barry Sonnenfeld, your mother needs to get on the phone. I mean, talk about how to humiliate a kid.
Yes.
But he also, he was a DP in porn films for a while before he
Oh,
hooked up with the Coen brothers, and the stories that he tells are just, I mean, I just was laughing so hard at some of these stories, and you realize, okay, this is how the entertainment, but you find yourself in these weird positions because
hmm.
you need to work. And he was surprised when he became a director,
Yeah,
um, because he wasn't the guy that just pointed the camera and made pretty pictures. He was always doing the storyboards and everything with the directors. So that's a good read. I highly recommend that. That one made me chuckle quite a bit.
I'll have to check that out. Love the Addams Family movies that he did, and the original Men in Black stands
Yeah,
out. It really stands out.
yeah. He's a good filmmaker. He's got a good sense of humor. And he talks about somebody that he worked with that he just hated. He and Penny Marshall did not get along on Big.
Oh, interesting.
Apparently, she thought he was the worst DP on the planet. And at the end, everything he wanted to do, he was right. She goes, you're still a terrible DP, but you picked a good camera lenses or something, she said. But it was so funny because you think, wow, I wouldn't have thought Penny Marshall wouldn't have got along with the DP. And everybody told her, you're wrong, Penny, you're wrong. But it's funny to read it and you go, it's like, then you go, now I got to go watch Big again. It's like,
Oh yeah, a whole other perspective.
I'll tell you, I went back and watched a bunch of his movies, with this other thing in my head.
The backstory, sort of
Well,
the
when
editorial comments.
when you talk to people about their work in comics, and then you go back and reread it, you read it differently.
Hmm.
Because
Hmm.
I remember watching Chris Claremont discussing the X-Men with a fan, and he's so good with his fans. He really, he always really believed that his characters were real. And you know, after he was done talking, I had to go read those issues again, and I enjoyed them much more having this little extra bit of passion that he had for something that when I initially read it, I was like, yeah, what do I care? I'm not a big, huge X-Men fan.
Yeah.
But there's
Yeah.
a lot more in it that maybe I didn't really notice. So it's fun, when you talk about this stuff, because I'll go back and read stuff that every time I have to talk about something in an interview, I'll go back and reread what I did. And that's something I'll be like, I did what? I don't
Mhm.
even remember. Like, did I write that? Did the editor do that? I don't remember now because editors sometimes altered a few things,
Yeah.
sometimes better and sometimes not.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember hearing a podcast with him where he was talking about, I think it was Jean Grey and trying to get that balance of like an empowered female. No, it was Captain Marvel, kind of
Hmm.
an empowered female figure and getting to take some steps in that. So it absolutely makes a difference to get to hear some of that background and perspective and then go back and go, oh, this is the direction, this is the decision.
Well, my favorite was I was at a convention once, and people didn't realize I was the same Gregory Wright that wrote comics that colored them. So
Hmm.
they were having this conversation about something I'd written that they thought was that sucked. You so
Right.
I walked up to them and I'm talking about it, and then I introduced myself, and they all went white. And I'm like, no, no, no. I said, let's not be little punk babies. And they said, let me have it. Here's your opportunity. So they were talking about it, and I said, oh well, I didn't like that either. And I said, this is why this story went this way. This is how this went like this. And we wound up having this really great conversation. They were asking all kinds of detailed questions, and then, and I said, oh, it's nice to meet you. They're like, oh, it's nice to meet you. Thanks for not killing us. And I was like, I sat back down at my table. They came back. They had gone and bought a whole bunch of stuff I wrote
Oh,
to get me to sign it because they said, now that you tell us this stuff, I said, so much of this stuff makes a lot more sense to me now because they just, when they initially, I went, well, and I said, that's good to know.
hmm.
But it was really fun because, there was times like, this is why this had to happen. What would you, and I said, well, what would you have done differently? Uh, I said, yeah, but that's your gut reaction. It's what we do. When you read something, you're watching a movie, you're immediately, well, I don't like this part. And then
Hmm.
you're online and people start talking about it. You're like, oh, I don't remember that. And then you go watch it, you go, maybe this didn't suck as much as I thought it sucked.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely.
fun.
And I
Social media.
imagine constraints too, right? Like by the companies, the characters, all of those
Oh
kind of
yeah,
things
there's
make a
always
difference.
stuff like that. No, I wasn't allowed to do that. I would have
Yeah.
liked to, but they said no. Actually, that rarely happened to me, to be honest. It was, I was one of those lucky people. Um, and the comics code didn't really nail me ever.
Awesome. Yeah. Yeah. When you
Um,
get to share the stories that you want to share.
for the most part, yeah, there were, except for, like Morbius, the stories that Bobby Chase and I discussed me writing never got written because we had to do so many crossovers, literally one right after another, and people above, her were trying to insist that Morbius shouldn't bite people and kill them and suck their blood. And I'm like, he's a vampire. That's what he does.
That's the definition.
What exactly is it you would like this character to do then? I mean, it was stuff like that. So after a year, I left the book and I said, we didn't do anything that we talked about. And I said, not that we didn't do some fun stuff. It was just everything we talked about did not get done. And it was just, because of the crossovers and because of,
Mhm.
the people trying to get in the way, and I responded by creating some characters that were way worse than that. Just to see if I could get away with it. Nobody complained. It wasn't Morbius, being blasted into bits and pulling himself back together, bloody bits. It was
Mhm.
another character.
Eh,
Okay.
all the
It
fun you
was
can have.
fun. It is fun.
Yeah,
Comics should be fun. If they're not
absolutely.
fun, what's the point?
True enough. Hopefully on the creating side as well.
It's usually fun. Sometimes it's frustrating. You get very full of yourself at various points. Well, I know better than you do. Well, maybe not. Uh, so I mean, you'll see a lot of your careers. Well, I quit because they wouldn't let me do this. Well, that was a stupid idea. That's why they didn't let you do it. And it's not your character. It's like, no, you can't kill Spider.
Yeah. Yeah, there has to be the exit plan.
Yes, we can't have that. But they did turn Cap into like a Hydra agent at one point, and so. But it
Yes.
didn't last. No, nobody dies forever.
Yeah, there's always a reset. Always a reset.
Yep.
Um, well, many thanks again for the time. I've kept you longer than promised. Hope that's okay.
Oh,
And
that's
always
great.
glad to talk. Always glad to talk comics and stories and creating.